With permission, I wish to make a statement on the UK's response to recent Russian maritime activity. I'm glad the House has been waiting for this morning. Mr. Speaker, a foreign vessel, Yantar, is currently in the North Sea, having passed through British waters. Let me be clear. This is a Russian spy ship used for gathering intelligence and mapping the UK's critical underwater infrastructure. Yantar entered the UK exclusive economic zone about 45 miles off the British coast on Monday. For the last 2 days, the Royal Navy has deployed HMS Somerset and HMS Tyne to monitor the vessel every minute through our waters. And I changed the Royal Navy's rules of engagement so that our warships can get closer and better track the Yantar. So far, the ship has complied with international rules of navigation. But, Mr. Speaker, this is the second time that Yantar has entered our waters in recent months. In November, the ship was also closely watched and detected loitering over UK critical undersea infrastructure. To deter any potential threat, I took measured steps then as part of a clear direct response to the Russian vessel. RAF maritime patrol aircraft, alongside HMS Catterstock, HMS Tyne, and RFA Proteus, were deployed to shadow Yantar's every movement. Today, I also wanted to confirm to the House that I authorised a Royal Navy submarine, strictly as a deterrent measure, to surface close to Yantar to make clear that we had been covertly monitoring its every move. The ship then left UK waters without further loitering and sailed down to the Mediterranean. As colleagues will understand, I won't comment further on reasons for operational security, but I want to thank all the personnel involved for their dedication and their professionalism. And I also want President Putin to hear this message. We see you, we know what you're doing, and we will not shy away from robust action to protect this country. And with our NATO allies, we're strengthening our response to ensure that Russian ships and aircraft cannot operate in secrecy near the UK or near NATO territory. Mr. Speaker, this is another example of growing Russian aggression, targeting our allies abroad and us at home. The heads of MI6 and the CIA recently stated together in a joint statement Russia is waging, they said, a reckless campaign of sabotage across Europe. We're seeing periodic incursions of Russian military aircraft into airspace for which we are responsible. And on Christmas Day, the S-Link 2 undersea cable between Finland and Estonia was damaged. Many analysts believe this was caused by a vessel in Russia's shadow fleet. Mr. Speaker, Russia is dangerous but fundamentally weak. In Ukraine, it has suffered devastatingly high rates of casualties over 3 years in a war that it thought it would win in a week. And compounding the humiliation, Putin has been forced to turn to North Korea to reinforce its frontline fighters. And while the strategic defeat in Syria, of course, has exposed its diminishing power on the global stage, and at home, the Russian economy faces crippling strains. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, Russia remains the most pressing and immediate threat to Britain. And I want to assure the House and the British people that any threat will be met with strength and resolve. First, we're delivering on the foundation of security in our plan for change by making Britain secure at home. Yantar has now passed through the Dover Strait and is in Dutch waters. In September, RAF Typhoon scrambled to intercept 2 Russian Bear-F aircraft operating near the UK. And the Royal Fleet Auxiliary is also playing an indispensable role in safeguarding offshore infrastructure with its multi-role ocean surveillance ship, RFA Proteus. Second, we are making Britain strong abroad, working with NATO and Joint Expeditionary Force allies. The UK activated Nordic Warden with Jeff partners after the S-Link 2 cable damage. The operation is tracking potential threats to undersea infrastructure, monitoring the movements of the Russian Shadow Fleet, and sending out real-time warnings of suspicious activity to Jeff allies and to NATO. And today I can confirm that the RAF will provide P-8 Poseidon and Rivet Joint Surveillance aircraft to join the new Baltic Sentry NATO deployment to protect critical infrastructure in the Baltic Sea. And third, Mr. Speaker, with allies we're piling on pressure on Putin. This year the UK will provide more financial aid in military support to Ukraine than at any time since the full-scale invasion began. 4.5 billion, delivering military support to enhance training and strengthen industrial collaboration. The UK is also leading ways to put pressure on the Russian economy, including sanctioning over 100 ships in the Russian Shadow Fleet, more than any other nation. Working with other countries to stop Russian military acquiring the goods and the equipment and the technologies they require to continue their fight and war against Ukraine. And with allies exposing the activities of the Russian intelligence services, expelling Russian intelligence officers, and sanctioning individuals responsible for hostile activity against the UK. Mr. Speaker, Russian aggression will not be tolerated at home or in Ukraine. It's why one of the first acts of this government was for the Prime Minister to launch the Strategic Defence Review. It's why the government has increased defence spending next year by almost £3 billion. And why we'll set a path to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP in the spring. Mr. Speaker, this new era of threat demands a new era for defence. Change is essential, not optional, and the government is determined to meet the challenge, determined to deliver for defence. We will protect the homeland and our critical national infrastructure, and we will make Britain secure at home and strong abroad.
Secretary of State James Cobb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for early sight of his statement. Particularly grateful to the Secretary of State for the greater level of transparency he has chosen to share with the House about the grey zone threat from Russia. We welcome that transparency because it is critical for our war readiness as a nation that, as far as we are able, and without compromising our national security and operational security, we tell the British public the truth about the serious nature of the Russian threat and what that will inevitably mean for public expenditure on defence. Now, I specifically welcome the change to the Royal Navy's rules of engagement. This sends a powerful signal to Putin that we will not be intimidated, and that if his aim is to keep pushing the boundaries of malign activity in our waters and those proximate to us, we will respond. And I can confirm that the government will have the full backing of His Majesty's opposition in doing so. We stand shoulder to shoulder with the government on Ukraine. We stand shoulder to shoulder with them on deterring the wider Russian threat that he has outlined today. Now, I appreciate it is unusual to go into such operational detail, including about the operational deployment of submarines. Equally, we appreciate that this is about sending the strongest possible signal to our adversaries about our clear intent to protect and defend our homeland. So, if I may, I have a number of specific questions about the statement and its particular contents. A key issue here is the safety and protection of critical undersea infrastructure. Beyond the operations the Secretary of State mentioned in his speech, such as Nordic Warden, Will he confirm whether he is looking to widen the number of international partners proactively involved in addressing this threat to the North Sea and the Baltic? And what discussions is he having to drive an internationally coordinated response, including through NATO? Given our prominent role within NATO, we have a clear opportunity to lead the way in developing cutting-edge underwater technologies that address these threats directly. Can the Secretary of State confirm that he is prioritising development of underwater capabilities, such as uncrewed systems, through Pillar 2 of AUKUS, but also with European allies, and in particular that R&D investment into capabilities to protect critical infrastructure will be an urgent priority? Moreover, will he commit to do everything possible to hinder the abilities of GRU operatives, including all possible action in concert with allies, to restrict their ability to enter the United Kingdom? Madam Deputy Speaker, I am very grateful to the personnel of our Navy, the RFA and our Air Force involved in addressing these threats, and I want to sincerely thank them as well as the crews of Allied vessels who assisted in tracking this ship through their waters. One particularly important point the Secretary of State said was that Russia is dangerous but fundamentally weak. Does he nevertheless agree that Russia's willingness to tolerate such enormous losses on the battlefield against Ukraine underlines that in conventional military terms it remains a formidable foe before one even considers its unconventional capabilities? In my view, Russia remains a critical threat to the United Kingdom. And for that reason, I very much welcome the Secretary of State's clear decision to be more open with the country about the threat we face. So can I urge him to ensure that from the heart of government we have a serious grip on communicating and planning for the fact we do face the most serious nation-on-nation military threat to our homeland for generations. In turn, this means that the SDR needs to be fundamentally threat-driven, prioritising homeland defence and putting the necessary resource in place. So to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, in a situation where we have seen the RFA, the Royal Navy, submarines, helicopters, P-8 aircraft and other assets involved in tracking Russian activity, does this not show the full extent of the work needed to defend our island and deter our adversaries, and ultimately why we need to increase defence spending as soon as possible? Finally, he said again in his statement, as he did at orals, and I welcome it, that the SDR will report in the spring. Can I urge him to ensure that this is in March at the very earliest opportunity, and that we will achieve at least 2.5% spending on defence this Parliament?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I welcome the Shadow Defence Secretary's welcome for this statement and for the Government's greater transparency. He, like I, has confirmed that he sees Russia as, in his words, the most critical threat to the UK. He's been a Defence Minister. He understands, as he acknowledges, the importance of sending the strongest possible signals to our adversaries, and that is the underlying reason for the decision I've taken to make this statement today. He asks about and argues that this is an opportunity for the UK to demonstrate leadership within NATO in response. I think we have already done that, not by asserting that argument, by the actions in launching and leading through the GEF 10 nations, the Nordic Warden response to the attack on the S-Link 2, and by now confirming that we will play a leading role in the new NATO deployment into the Baltic, which is linked to the work that we're doing through Nordic Warden. He asks about the priority for our undersea cables for our homeland infrastructure. These cables aren't simply a technical network. These are the infrastructure, the things that we depend on for our daily lives, the operation of the internet, the supply of energy, the communications with other parts of the world. He will therefore have seen and noted in the terms of reference of the Strategic Defence Review launched by the Prime Minister within 2 weeks of this government being elected in July, that defending and reinforcing the homeland defence of Britain is foremost in those terms of reference. And we will, as I've said, report on the Strategic Defence Review in the spring.